Some people watch and then move on, but some stay because they know Africa deserves truth, freedom, and dignity. This channel is not for everyone. It is for those who believe in that. And if you are here, it means you have chosen to stand on the side of history. Now let me ask you a question. Why would a young president risk his very life at 4 o'clock in the morning to stop 57 trucks rolling in the dark? That is not just a headline. That is not just politics. That is destiny knocking at the door of a nation. In the next minutes, you will witness a story that has shaken the world, a story of courage and betrayal, of billion-dollar plots and midnight arrests, of weapons turned into school bells. You will see how one daring stand in West Africa exposed the games of empires and reminded the world that dignity is not for sale. Stay with us until the very end. Do not just watch history, be part of it. And if you believe in truth, in freedom, in Africa's awakening, then walk with us on this journey. 4 o'clock in the morning, the 16th of August, 2025. Most of the nation was asleep. The streets were silent. The borderlands lay still under the moonlight. But in that quiet hour, history was stirring. A convoy was moving slowly along the border near Canari. 57 trucks, heavy, deliberate, dragging their wheels like shadows in the night. On the surface, they carried sacks and crates marked as humanitarian aid. But something about their presence was wrong. Who brings charity in the dark, through back roads, avoiding the open highways? Captain Musa Kabore, the border commander, felt it in his spirit. He had seen many shipments before. He had watched many trucks cross his checkpoints. But this was different. He alerted his superiors, and the chain of command lit up. Within minutes, the report reached the desk of President Ibrahim Traoré himself. Now imagine this moment. A young president, no older than some of your grandchildren, receives a midnight call. Mr. President, something is moving in the shadows. 57 trucks, destination uncertain. He does not dismiss it. He does not delay. He knows the stakes. He knows what history has done to nations that close their eyes. And so he calls upon General Ibrahim Zerbo, commander of the Special Forces. His instructions are clear. Intercept the convoy. But be careful. This is no ordinary smuggling. This may be the spark of something larger. From that moment, the operation was set in motion. Drones lifted into the sky. Helicopters hovered silently. Special forces spread out across the dirt roads, setting ambush points under the cover of darkness. The soldiers were tense but determined. They were not just intercepting trucks. They were standing at the gate of their nation's survival. Then, at 4 o'clock sharp, the convoy reached the trap. The road was blocked. The drivers panicked. Some tried to flee. But within minutes, all were captured. The silence of the night was broken, not by gunfire, but by the weight of discovery. Because when the first truck was opened, the truth exploded into view. Beneath the sacks of rice and grain lay rifles, thousands of them. AK-47s stacked like firewood, M16s wrapped in plastic, rocket launchers hidden under tarps, crates of grenades, anti-aircraft missiles, boxes of ammunition stretching farther than the eye could see. It was not aid. It was an arsenal. Enough firepower to arm an entire army. Enough explosives to tear a nation apart. Captain Cabaret, his voice shaking, called the president. Mr. President, you will not believe this. These trucks are packed with weapons. Not just one or two, but 57 trucks, each one a fortress of death. And President Traore replied with the words of a man who understood the weight of that revelation. Secure everything. Do not lose a single bullet. Make those drivers talk. Someone is preparing for war in Burkina Faso. Think about that, my brothers and sisters. 57 trucks, 25,000 rifles, 13 million rounds of ammunition, 70,000 grenades, 2,500 rocket launches, 400 anti-aircraft missiles, 50 tons of explosives. That is not random. That is not petty smuggling. That is not a street gang looking for profit. That is war, planned in the shadows. The discovery sent a chill through the nation. For the elders who had lived through coups and uprisings, it brought back memories of darker days. For the youth, it was a shock. They realized how close they had been to chaos. And so the question rose, echoing in every household, every marketplace, every government office. Who were these weapons for? Who was pulling the strings? The people had seen many hardships, They had endured poverty, they had faced terrorism. But this was something else. This was betrayal on a scale unseen. And, as the investigation began, the story only grew darker. But the weapons were only the beginning. The real danger was hidden in the names behind them. The drivers were trembling. Some claimed they did not know what they carried. Some swore they had been told these were parts for farming machines, bound for a warehouse across the border. But as the questioning deepened, one man broke. His name, Marc-Antoine Zongo. His voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. They told us we were hauling machinery. But when we gathered near the border, the instructions changed. We were ordered to head for a secret warehouse in Togo. From there, the cargo would be moved overseas. The investigators pressed further. Where had these weapons come from? Who financed them? Piece by piece, the truth unfolded. Serial numbers had been filed off, but not perfectly. With advanced tracing, experts discovered a chilling trail. Some rifles were relics of the Libyan civil war. Some had seen combat in Yemen. And still others were brand new, fresh from European factories, never fired once. When the total value was calculated, it stunned even the hardened officials. Over $700 million. Let me say that again, $700 million worth of death disguised as sacks of rice. President Ibrahim Traoré called an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. Around the table lay a full inventory. 25,000 AK-47 rifles, 10,000 M6 rifles, 70,000 grenades, 400 anti-aircraft missiles, 50 tons of explosives. The defense minister, General Sadu, shook his head in disbelief. With this firepower, Mr. President, you could invade a country. The interior minister, Hussein Traore, added with a grim face, if these weapons had reached their destination, Burkina Faso would already be burning. Terror groups could launch a long-term insurgency, or worse, a coup. The room fell into silence. But then President Traoré stood, his voice calm yet firm. This is not random. This is part of a larger plan to destabilize our land, just like Libya, Syria, and Yemen. But hear me well, we are not asleep. We are awake, and we will not bow. Then came the confession that shook the nation. One of the arrested men, François Bongo, a wealthy businessman, could no longer carry the burden of silence. Under questioning, his resistance broke. His words fell like thunder. This was no ordinary smuggling. This was a plan, months in the making. We had promises of support from abroad. The goal was to overthrow President Traoré and install a government loyal to Western powers. The room froze. The investigators leaned in closer. President Traoré asked the question that burned on every mind. Which powers? Name them. Bongo hesitated, his hands trembling. Then he whispered, the meetings were in Accra. Some delegates came from Abidjan, the instructions from Paris, and the final approval from Washington. My brothers and sisters, imagine that moment. Imagine the silence that filled that room. For decades, Africa had been warned, manipulated, divided by the long arms of foreign capitals. But here it was, spoken openly, confessed with trembling lips. The plot had a name, Operation Restore Democracy. Its budget, $1 billion. And the 57 trucks were only phase 1. Under pressure, Bongo revealed more names. Former ministers, retired generals, businessmen with deep pockets, even foreign diplomats carrying passports of immunity. It was not just treason. It was a global conspiracy. When this revelation reached the public, the shock was electric. In the markets, people whispered, so it is true. The empire still wants our chains. In the churches, pastors prayed for strength. Lord, keep us from becoming another Libya. And in the streets, ordinary citizens clenched their fists in resolve. The news spread across borders like wildfire. Western governments, caught in the accusation, demanded the release of their nationals. They called the arrests illegal, threatened sanctions. But Traoré stood firm. A diplomatic passport does not grant permission to commit crimes on our soil. At the same time, voices of support rose from the east and the south. Russia declared Traoré was right to defend his nation. China pledged security assistance. Turkey spoke of shared destiny. Iran condemned foreign interference. And from Latin America, Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela hailed Traoré as a modern Simon Bolivar, a liberator standing against empire. Do you see the contrast? One side pressuring, threatening, denying. Another side supporting, affirming, standing shoulder to shoulder. It was no longer just about weapons. It was no longer just about Burkina Faso. It was about the future balance of power in Africa and the world. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come: the names of those waiting in the shadows. The news did not stay behind closed doors. It could not. 3 days after the seizure, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before the nation, before the cameras, before the world. Behind him towered the evidence: mountains of rifles, crates of grenades, rockets stacked like firewood. The sight alone sent a tremor through every living room. He began, slowly, deliberately. My fellow citizens, and to the international community, 3 days ago we intercepted the largest weapons smuggling operation in our history. But this was more than smuggling. This was a plot to destroy us from within. His voice deepened, steady as a preacher calling truth into the open. They say these were trucks of aid, but they were trucks of war. They wanted to plunge our land into chaos, to divide us, to replace our government with puppets. But today, the mask has fallen. The crowd, gathered in Ouagadougou, roared in response. Women ululated, men raised their fists, elders wept tears of relief. For years they had heard whispers of betrayal, of plots in the shadows. Now the proof stood in plain sight. Traoré lifted a stack of documents. Here is the evidence, the weapons, the money, the names. You will see for yourselves. And in that moment the people realized this was not rumor. This was not speculation. It was betrayal laid bare. Investigations moved fast. Raids were conducted in the capital. 23 addresses struck at dawn. 17 warehouses filled with weapons were discovered. Among those arrested were men the people recognized: former ministers, retired generals, businessmen who once smiled in public while plotting in secret. The revelation cut deep. How could sons of the nation, men entrusted with power, sell their land for foreign promises? In the churches, elders whispered, Judas was not the last traitor. In the mosques, imams preached, the enemy within is more dangerous than the enemy outside. And yet, amid the anger, there was also pride. Pride that their young leader had not hesitated. Pride that their soldiers had stood firm. Pride that, for once, Africa was not caught sleeping but caught the enemy in the act. Journalists fired questions at the press conference. CNN asked, which countries are behind this? Traoré replied, the investigation is ongoing. But some of these weapons were manufactured in NATO countries. BBC pressed, who are the masterminds? Traoré answered, 17 have been arrested, including former ministers and generals. Informants are speaking. The full truth will soon be revealed. Then Al Jazeera raised the regional question. How will this affect West African security? Traoré's words thundered. This is not just an attack on Burkina Faso. This is an attack on all of Africa. Similar plots are unfolding in Mali, Niger, Guinea. We must unite. And the people responded. Not just in Burkina Faso, but across the Sahel. In Bamako, in Niamey, in Conakry, ordinary citizens lit candles, prayed, marched, saying, we stand together. We will not be broken. But even as unity rose, so too did fear. Fear of retaliation, fear of sanctions, fear of what might come next. Western nations threatened economic punishment if the foreign detainees were not released. Banks whispered of frozen accounts. Diplomats demanded private meetings. Still, President Traoré held his ground. History will judge those who try to intimidate us. We will not bow. And here lies the deeper question for us, my brothers and sisters in America. Do you believe Africa should decide its own future? For those who marched across Selma, for those who stood in Washington in 1963, this question is not foreign. It is the same question that echoed in our struggle. Who owns our destiny? Who decides our tomorrow? The consequences of the seizure stretched beyond borders. It sparked a debate across the continent. Could Africa finally shake off the invisible hand of empire? Could it build its own security, its own dignity, its own path? The truth is, what began as a midnight seizure of trucks became something larger. A turning point, a reckoning, a call to awaken. But this was not just about Burkina Faso. The conspiracy stretched far beyond these borders. Why should this matter to you, sitting thousands of miles away in America? Why should a convoy in Burkina Faso stir the heart of someone who once marched in Selma or sat in a church pew listening to Dr. King? Because the story is the same. It is the story of people told they were too weak to stand, too small to resist, too dependent to claim their own future. It is the story of hidden hands pulling strings, deciding who should lead, who should fall, who should kneel. When President Ibrahim Traoré stood before the world with mountains of captured weapons, he was not just speaking for Burkina Faso. He was speaking for every people who ever fought to breathe free. For those who remember the cries of Montgomery. For those who recall the fists raised at the Olympics. For those who sang "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around." In America, the headlines called it a Burkina Faso coup. Some painted Traoré as reckless, others as a patriot. The debate split screens and filled columns. But beneath the noise, the deeper truth remained. Here was a young man saying, "Africa will not bow." Across the globe, reactions divided. Western powers bristled, demanded the release of their detained nationals, threatened sanctions. But other nations saw in Traoré a mirror of their own defiance. Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, Venezuela, they spoke words of support, offering aid, declaring solidarity. And ordinary people, yes, ordinary men and women from Harlem to Lagos, felt something stir. A reminder that the fight for dignity is never finished, that every generation must take its turn to stand. So I ask you, elders of our community, when you look at this moment, do you not see history repeating itself? When water hoses were turned on our children, when dogs were unleashed on our marchers, the word said, "Stay quiet." But we did not. And when Burkina Faso was told, "Accept your chains," they too said, "No more." The parallels are clear, and the message is simple. Freedom is never given. It is taken, it is held, it is defended. And yet the question remains, where does Africa go from here? What comes after 57 trucks of weapons are seized? What comes after billion-dollar conspiracies are dragged into the light? For President Ibrahim Traoré, the answer was not vengeance, it was transformation. He stood before his people, before the elders, the mothers, the youth, and he made a promise that stunned the world. "These weapons," he declared, his voice echoing across Independence Square, "will not be used for war. We will melt them. We will forge them into tools of life. With their steel we will build 100 schools, 50 health clinics, and 1,000 kilometers of irrigation canals. From tools of death will rise projects of life." And then, before tens of thousands, the first rifle was dropped into the fire. The crowd gasped as the metal began to melt, the deadly shape dissolving into raw possibility. From the molten steel, workers poured a mold. Out of the furnace came not another gun, not another bomb, but a school bell. Traoré lifted it high. "This," he said, "is the sound our enemies feared. This is the sound our children will hear each morning, the sound of peace." The people erupted in joy. Some wept, some danced, some prayed aloud. An old man whispered, "They wanted to kill our grandchildren with these, but now those same weapons will call them to class." This is more than symbolism. It is a declaration. Just as chains once became gospel songs, just as pain once became poetry, now rifles are becoming bells. The story of resilience is being written again, and the world is watching. The African Union praised this act as historic. A United Nations envoy said it was the first time in African history that weapons were literally transformed into instruments of learning. Around the globe, newspapers carried the image of molten rifles reborn as school bells. But let us be clear, my brothers and sisters, this is only the beginning. For even as Burkina Faso celebrates, the forces of empire do not sleep. The networks of power still scheme. The agents of destabilization still whisper. That is why this moment matters. Because what Traoré calls the Africa Awakening is not a single event. It is a movement. It is a declaration that the old order is fading and a new chapter is rising. And so I ask you, do you believe this awakening can last? Do you believe Africa can hold its ground, write its own destiny, and stand tall among nations? But remember, this is only chapter 1 of Africa Awakening. The struggle is far from over. My brothers and sisters, let us pause and reflect. What we have witnessed is not just an Ibrahim Traoré weapon seizure. It is not just 57 trucks of hidden death. It is something greater. It is an Africa Awakening. For too long, outsiders wrote the script. They chose the rulers, they controlled the resources, they pulled the strings. But now, a generation rises that says, no more. This land is ours. This destiny is ours. This future is ours. Just as we in America once marched to claim our dignity, so too Africa is marching now. Just as we turned the pain of chains into the power of gospel, Africa is turning weapons of war into bells of peace. And every ring of those bells will echo across the continent, across the ocean, across history itself. Do not miss the meaning here. This is not only about Burkina Faso. This is about every people told they are too small, too weak, too divided. It is about every elder who remembers Jim Crow, every soul who remembers Selma, every heart that still beats with the fire of justice. So I ask you, what do you see in this story? Do you see only a Burkina Faso coup narrowly avoided? Or do you see the beginning of a new dawn? Do you see chains breaking? Do you see nations rising? Do you see dignity finally standing tall? If you believe Africa deserves truth and freedom, leave a comment. Africa rise. Let your voice join this moment. Let your witness be counted. Gentlemen, thank you for giving your time and staying until the very end. You are not just viewers. You are witnesses to Africa's rise. What you have heard today is only a glimpse of the truth. In the next video, I will reveal what the world powers have tried to keep hidden. If you believe Africa deserves freedom and dignity, then stay with us, because the truth that comes next may change the way you see the world.